The Supreme Court recently issued a stay on a pro-life Louisiana law. The High Court earlier this month issued a stay on enforcement of a Louisiana law requiring abortionists have admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of the abortion facility. The Supreme Court order comes after the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in favor of the law. The law was introduced in 2014 by Democratic State Representative Katrina Jackson. It passed with overwhelming bipartisan support in both the state's House and Senate. Joining us now is the pro-life Democrat behind this law. Louisiana State Representative Katrina Jackson joins us via Skype from Monroe, Louisiana. Representative, thanks for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Representative Jackson, you introduced this bill, which passed, as I mentioned, with overwhelming support in both your state's House and Senate. What did you set out to accomplish with this piece of legislation?
This was a women's health piece of legislation. We try to always legislate constitutionally here. Being a practicing attorney, that's very important. But also, we want to pass bills that actually help the constituency while, of course, clearing hurdles in court, because we know that a lot of our laws are challenged in the area of abortion. Louisiana already has in place here the ambulatory surgical center law. That means that every surgical center in the state of Louisiana must have a physician within 30, which has admitting privileges to hospitals within the 30-mile radius of their facility. So that was really important because Dorinda Borley with the Bioethics Defense Fund contacted me and she said, listen, I don't know if you guys realize this, but the law that was passed years ago to protect women's health and doesn't apply to abortion facilities. It was inadvertently left out because abortion facilities were in another portion of the statute. And so really what I sought out to do here is to make sure that we didn't make an exception for women's health when it came to abortion. And that's really what this law is. It's quite different from some other laws you've seen because our state actually has an interest in what happens here in the state of Louisiana regarding women's health with physicians having a 30-mile radius admitting privileges to a hospital.
Why then, Katrina, is a law like this getting any pushback at all, in your opinion?
I'm not sure. I think that, of course, those who are pro-choice don't want any regulations. And there's not any area of healthcare, and I don't consider abortion healthcare, to be honest with you, but any area where physicians are practicing what they believe it to be healthcare that doesn't have some type of regulations. And so those who are pro-choice don't want any regulations on abortions. We face that so many times in so many battles across this state and across the nation. And that's the only reason why there'd be pushback, because this is a common sense law. Louisiana requires that if you have a mole removed in a surgical center, that physician has admitting privileges within a 30-mile radius.
What then is your reaction to the Supreme Court stay on this law?
Well, I know that Justice Roberts and others on the Supreme Court will issue stays usually on the status quo of law until such time as they can hear the actual case. And so we're anticipating that the abortion doctors will file for writ to the Supreme Court. That's the real decision for us. Whether or not justices issue a stay just to keep the status quo in place until they can actually review a law is something that you see traditionally, regardless of where you legislate or what area of the law you legislate in. And so my reaction was, of course, I hope that they wouldn't issue the stay and our law could go into place. We've been at this, 4.5 years now. It passed in 2014, so 4.5, 5 years now. But I understand, being a practicing attorney, that courts usually will stay with the status quo until such time as they've had an opportunity to actually review the law.
In the meantime, what steps do you and the state of Louisiana plan to take in order to defend this law?
Well, our Attorney General, Jeff Landry, is defending the law, and he is very aggressively defending this law. We believe it's a common sense law. Our governor, who was actually in the state legislature at the time and voted for this law, is a Democratic governor who's for life at every stage of life, and he is supportive of it. And I'm sure his staff will probably submit a amicus curiae brief if the Supreme Court takes this issue up. They still have to decide whether they take it up or not. And of course, for the first time I'm being admitted into the Supreme Court, I've just filled out all of my paperwork to be admitted to the United States Supreme Court because I want to be there if it's heard, if the Supreme Court decides to take it up. I've talked to the Attorney General's office and say, look, this is a law I believe in. And so I want to be there at the table arguing aggressively for this law. And so we're all working collectively to make sure that we're fighting aggressively for it.
Absolutely. Katrina, I think some of our viewers may be surprised to hear you are a pro-life Democrat because there are fewer and fewer pro-life Democrats serving in office. Can you share with our audience, why are you pro-life?
It's what I said at the March of Washington, the March for Life in Washington. Before I'm black or white, before I'm male or female, before I'm Democrat or Republican, I'm a Christian. And I didn't get into politics to put my Christian values behind me. I got into politics to advocate for Christian values, to take care of people, to pass common sense legislation that made sense, but also followed the will of God. My district elected me overwhelmingly. When I first ran, it was 4 of us in a race. And I was elected with 50-some% of the vote with 3 other candidates in the race. And everyone said, you're going to a runoff. But I believe it's because I told them, I said, listen, I'm going to pray every day. I'm going to ask God to lead me. And when I go into the legislature, I'm not going to abandon God's principles. And so it was very important for me not to. And so this is what I told actually my party in Louisiana. I made it real clear. I never hid from it. I never ran from it. I said, look, Proverbs says that God hates the shedding of innocent blood. That's one of the 6 things that he hates. And I'm going to be on the side of God. I'm going to hate what he hates. I'm going to advocate for the things that he told me to advocate for.
What has been your experience as a pro-life Democratic legislator?
It's varied. I have not had a lot of opposition in my district, but it's been highs and lows in the sense of when I go into certain parts of the state. I know in New Orleans I received death threats, and so for a couple of years when I would go into New Orleans, of course, to do pro-life speeches, I would be escorted in by the state police, and they were so wonderful. I was never scared because I said, you know what, God, I know you're going to protect me as we go in. And then I've had some highlight moments. The only bill that I've ever passed where 80 some out of 105 House members stood at the podium with me for final passage was this bill. It was both Democrat, Republicans, black and white, male and female. I mean, that is the most beautiful picture I have in the State House was the day we made final passage of this bill and 80 some other members came and stood around the podium with me. So I can say that overwhelmingly, even with the death threat or things that have happened, my experience as a pro-life Democrat has been heartwarming. I've seen people come together. This is one of the issues that I advocate for, where it doesn't matter who you are, what party you're a part of, what walk of life you come from, your social economic background. We're standing together, and so it's been great.
Finally, Katrina, you mentioned you spoke at this year's March for Life rally stage in Washington, D.C. Can you tell us, what was that like?
It was a surreal experience. I remember walking on stage and seeing everyone. I was like, okay, God, I've never been in front of this type of audience. You're going to have to really give me what to say and just lead me. And people don't know this, but I didn't even have a prepared speech. I went into Washington a couple of days earlier, nights earlier, and I stayed up most of the night saying, what am I going to say, God? What do you want me to speak on? It wasn't until I actually came on stage that I knew what I was going to say. And so it was a surreal experience. I tell people all the time in my interviews, it was truly a move of the Holy Ghost. I tell people that all the time.
Louisiana State Representative Katrina Jackson, thank you for your pro-life work and thanks for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much.
We continue our pro-life conversation in our D.C. studio with Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List. Thanks for being here, Marjorie.
Hello, Catherine.
What is your reaction to the Supreme Court issuing this stay on this pro-life Louisiana law? What should our viewers make of this?
Well, don't grieve yet. It's actually just a temporary situation. There's a period of time where that stay will expire, and then after that it would just go into law. But what we're hoping in the meantime, though, is that the court does agree to take this up. The Supreme Court should look at this, and it should take a look at it versus the similar law in Texas and really overturn that Hellerstedt decision, which said that you can't do some really common sense stuff. And we really think, because Roberts agreed with us on the Hellerstedt decision, that it's possible that he'll agree with us on this. So there's a lot of hope. So keep watching.
What do you think, Marjorie, it reveals about abortion advocates, the fact that they're against this Louisiana law?
You know, it's something that pro-choice, pro-life, pro-abortion, anti-choice, whatever you call any of us,
right,
we ought to all be for taking care of women in cases of times of real disaster. All this does is require that abortionists have admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles in case disaster happens. So what this says to me is it really makes me remember, helps me remember the words of this state senator in Pennsylvania after the Gosnell horror. Her niece died in the Gosnell clinic. She was very pro-choice, but she said that is so clear to her now that the movement is so much more focused on the institution of abortion than the women that are having them. And that's exactly what this is.
Can you speak to Katrina Jackson and her witness and her work as a pro-life Democrat.
She is beautiful, inside and out. She continually says, I'll never back away from this. It has nothing to do with the political party. This is just her being a Christian woman and being who she is. It's an extension of who she is. I think the Democratic Party ought to be following right behind her. She is a leader for the future for the Democratic Party, and we are so behind her, love her, and will do anything for her.
Wow, that's incredible. And this 2014 Louisiana law passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. Are there any opportunities for that kind of bipartisan support for pro-life laws in any other states?
Well, there are tons of consensus and overwhelming support for all sorts of pro-life laws. This, right after the Gosnell horror, kind of took off because they looked into these horrific situations in clinics and then started reading about all the stories. Laws started to pass. But then the Supreme Court overturned the Texas law, that Hellerstedt law, and therefore it just kind of put a chill on laws similar to this. But thank God for Representative Jackson, who said, no way, this is obviously wrong, we're going to continue to do this. And this law pretty directly challenges the Texas law. So we have an opportunity to overturn it, and then other similar laws would subsequently pass without question.
We'll keep our eye on this. It's an important one. Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Catherine.